I'm going to show you a spectacular game from round 6 of the FIDE Grand Swiss tournament taking place on the Isle of Man. Remember, in this tournament, the top 2 players will qualify for the candidates, so competition is fierce. Right, what have we got here? Samuel Sevian playing white. Well-known American Grandmaster, just 22 years old. Feels like he's been around for years and years. He has, but still only 22, highly experienced. And he's playing Javokhir Sindaro, 17 years old, from Uzbekistan. So, you know, the Uzbeks have this really strong young team of players. Remember, they won the gold medals in the Chennai Olympiad, and Sindaro is just 17 years old. Had a good result in the Qatar Masters as well, came 4th there. So, move order is tricky. Here, Sevian played pawn to e4. So why e4 and not d4? Well, if you play d4, then black has the option to go into a Grunfeld. So in playing e4, it's clear that Sevian wants to cut out that Grunfeld option. So for example, after bishop g7, then d4, and we arrive back into a King's Indian. So that's the point of e4 instead of d4. But Sindaro thinks, okay, I want to cut across white's plans. You won't get into a mainline King's Indian so easily. And he plays e5. Well, because this starts to gain control over the d4 square, then white really needs to break with d4 himself. So here's the game: knight f3, attacking this e-pawn and preparing d4, bishop g7. Now, if black has the chance to play knight c6, gaining control over that central square, then black is doing absolutely fine. So that's why d4 is played. Just breaking in the middle. So pawn takes, knight takes. So you can see that white has established this nice pawn center. And if white can hold that very well, then, well, with that kind of central domination, it's very unpleasant for black. So black somehow needs to fight against that. And move order here is very careful by black. So first of all, knight f6. Notice he hasn't moved that d-pawn yet. So knight f6. Well, pushing will mean, well, there'll be a nasty pin there. So knight c3 defends the pawn, and castles. Again, you can't entertain this move. That's no good. Bishop e3. Supporting the knight. Looks like a normal square for the bishop. And now d6 would be quite slow. This could give white the chance to consolidate, perhaps with just f3 and queen d2 and castles queenside. Maybe with just bishop e2. I think probably f3 must be the move. And it's hard to break down this position. So after bishop e3, Sindaro played c6. He wants to break with d5 and just destroy white's centre, just break up white's centre. And Sevian plays queen d2, so obviously he's looking to castle on the queen side. I might return to this position actually. I think we're already at a very critical moment in the game. So rook e8 attacks the e-pawn. So therefore f3 and d5. So black is able to get this pawn break in straight away, and that's absolutely crucial, particularly as white's king is still in the middle of the board. So white has to be extremely careful already. And notice this is why black didn't play the standard pawn move d6. If we go back to, let's say, this position, you know, a kind of reflex move here would be to go d6 and then to think again about what you're going to play next. But Sindarov appreciates that every move counts in this kind of position. If you lose like half a move here, then you might have missed that window of opportunity to break in the center. So d5, excellent move. Pawn takes d5, c takes d5, and, well, if white continues to exchange, that just brings the queen to a superb square, and you can see with this nasty pin, that beautiful bishop on g7, well, it's obvious that black has a frightening initiative there. And if white tries to keep it close with c5, bishop h6 is very unpleasant. So Sevian just gets out quickly. Understandable. Castles queenside.
¿Dolor muscular o articular? Prueba Voltadol Forte, que se absorbe localmente y reduce la causa del dolor, la inflamación, para un alivio de hasta 24 horas. Voltadol Forte. Lea las instrucciones de este medicamento y consulte al farmacéutico.
Black just develops knight c6. Already this is, I think, a very uncomfortable position for white. Because although the king has escaped from the e-file, it's actually still rather exposed on c1. You know, ideally you'd like to play it right into the corner here, but that takes time. And that bishop is trained on the queen side. So white has to take extreme care already. I mean, one thought might be to play g4, not really with any attacking ideas in mind, but simply because it takes away that square from the bishop. That's a thought. Another thought is to play knight c2, which covers some squares and, you know, perhaps looks to exchange, which would sort of reduce some of the tension. Also, yeah, it defends the bishop too. But Sevian had another idea in mind. He was concerned about this bishop on g7, understandably, and he exchanged knights on c6 and then played bishop d4, which just challenges that strong bishop on g7. That bishop on g7 is a monster lying in wait, ready to just kind of strike across the board to the queen side. So this looks pretty normal to match it with bishop d4. Nevertheless, there is a slight problem. After this exchange on c6, you can see the b file has opened, so rook b8. Looks very logical. So pawn takes pawn. Right. Here is your first chance to shine in the game. Black to play. If you were playing with black, what would you play here? Cheers, folks. Well, if black simply recaptures with the pawn, then we could tuck the king away. And I think that's what Sevian was aiming for. You can see the bishop is blockading very nicely. Yes, the king is still a little bit insecure, but it's not too bad. If white can bring this bishop into the game and then rook e1, then you can see how white has stability there. And that's why I love black's next move. Sindarov did not take on d5. Instead, he played c5. It's really destabilizing. So the bishop takes and queen a5, and black gains a vital tempo for the attack. So the queen comes into the game with tempo, attacking that bishop. And, well, here Sevian tries to regain some time by playing bishop d6, attacking that rook. What about if it just comes back to d4? Is this a big deal? Well, absolutely it is. Bishop f5. You can see the king has been cut off here. And if g4, you don't even bother moving the bishop. You throw the rook in, threatening this one, and actually this is a crushing attack for black. So let's go back. So queen a5 just played. Bishop d6. White is already in massive trouble. It's possible actually just to play rook b7 here. Black's attack is very strong. But Sindaro goes for a spectacular option. He plays bishop f5. So as I mentioned before, that bishop cuts across the board and starts to really restrict the king. White's best here is to take that rook and then try to bring that bishop across to defend here. But this is still very, very difficult for white to defend. Black has several interesting options here. Queen here, maybe knight here. In any case, after bishop f5, Sevian underestimated black's chances. He played g4, which on the surface of it doesn't look bad. If you can drive that bishop away from this beautiful diagonal, well, then white has good defensive prospects. So what do you play here? Black to play. What do you do? Just rook c8. You don't need to bother about that bishop. Such a cool move. Pawn takes bishop and knight takes d5. So black is a whole piece down, but look at all these pieces in play. Terrible pin on the c-file, and the rook and the bishop are just bystanders. And in fact, that bishop doesn't achieve too much. So just compare the two kings. Black's king completely safe, white's king in the line of fire. Okay, let's see what happened. Well, first of all, I should mention, what about queen takes knight? Well, rook takes knight, and that's really the end of that. If that's taken, it's mate follows shortly, like that. And otherwise, if king b1, you can exchange and play rook e1 mate. Everything fits into place. You see even that rook on e8 coming into play. Mate next move. Pawn takes pawn played. H takes g6. Bishop h3. Well, this is all in vain. Knight takes knight. Black is crashing through. Well, once again, pawn takes, rook takes. That's absolutely hopeless. Let me show you just one nice variation here. King b1, queen b5 check, queen b2, and now we need to get that bishop into the game. So rook c1 check. Rook takes and queen takes queen mate. Makes me think of the dragon variation of the Sicilian and various other King's Indian games. Okay, back we go. So after knight takes knight, bishop takes rook, rook takes. Everything's still lined up perfectly against the king, rather. Queen d3, trying to somehow escape, but no. Queen takes a2. This is too much. I mean, actually, in this position, black is only the exchange down for this position. Bishop c7. Okay, that's a little bit of trickery at the end. Rook takes, then I suppose hoping for queen d8. Even that I don't quite trust, but anyway. But there's no need to take the bishop, of course. Knight takes rook, and here Sevian resigned. For example, if rook takes knight, queen takes b2 is mate. If queen d7, well, let's give a check there. I mean, there are many ways to win this position, of course. But let's show you this one. Queen b3. Queen check. Now let's grab that rook in the corner. And now black is a whole rook up with more to come. Absolutely devastating. It just shows that in these kind of positions, when you castle queenside, you know, you have to think whose king is safer. Look at that fantastic bishop. Look how safe black's king is, whereas white's king is rather exposed. Now, white can get away with this if you play very carefully, but Sevian missed a couple of things. I think in particular that move c5 was a beautiful idea, just gaining a tempo. I mean, it seems, with hindsight, seems very simple and very clear. But after this, white is really struggling. I mentioned a moment in the opening, way back, after bishop e3, c6. So instead of queen d2, there's a very interesting idea, which is to push that pawn with e5. So this exploits the fact that black has not played d6. Knight e8. So it pushes the knight back. Now just for a moment you can see that black's development is pretty poor. Look at that bishop on c8. Now if white follows up with, say, f4, that would be very poor. Then d6. And once that pawn on e5 disappears, you can see actually these pawns are really poorly placed because they block those bishops, and you can see there are weaknesses all along the e-file. That's a horrible position. But let's go back after e5, knight e8. In fact, there's no need to protect that pawn. It's going to take time to take that pawn, and then you have to turn back to development. So white just ignores that. h4. And after bishop takes, h5. Now that is an interesting position, because suddenly black's king comes under fire. And yes, white can still go queenside, but with a massive attack on the king. Now perhaps it's better for black not to take that pawn. It takes too much time out of black's busy schedule. Black needs to be developing, so maybe it's better to play d6 rather. But yeah, there's a very interesting possibility here. Give up that pawn anyway and go h5, just to weaken that g6 point, and then moves like bishop d3 are coming. Fascinating position. But this bold move wasn't met correctly by Sevian. Or yeah, I think when you reach this, I would say this is quite a critical position. The middle game is about to start. Well, white's still in the opening, but even at this very early stage in the game, you need to be so